Thank you, and welcome to the National Press Theater. My name is Rachel Haynes. I'm with CTV, but today I will be moderating the question and answer period. Before we begin, I just have a few preventative measures that we share to protect the health of our interpreters. To prevent any disruptive audio feedback incidents, we remind all participants to keep their earpieces away from the microphone at all times. And when you are not using them, to please place it face down on the middle of the sticker that you will see in front of you. We'll start with the remarks from the minister and the other speakers. Then we will turn to the room for a Q&A. Once we have gone through the questions in the room, we will then turn it over to the Zoom. If you are participating by Zoom and you have any questions, please raise your hand during the Q&A period. And with that, I'll hand it over to the minister.
Thank you. Wajagam Shaj, Naskum Naji Dukshia, Gegoni Mandy Gull-Masty, Canada de Baie-James, Abitibi. Hello, good afternoon, bonjour, merci de venir. Thank you for coming. My name is Mandy Gull-Masty, Minister of Indigenous Services, Canada. I'm joining you today from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Nunavik people. Merci d'être ici. Thank you for coming. I know that we are beginning to prepare for the holiday season, so I want to really express my thanks for joining today to tell this important story. At the heart of today's presentation is the work that we're undertaking to drive and deliver better results for First Nations children. We are looking to ensure fewer children in care, ideally none, fewer children entering into the system for the first time, ensuring that there is shorter periods of care, and that more children are placed within community with those that they know and love. On a une vision claire, c'est une vision urgente. Une vision qui est basée sur les besoins de les enfants de les Premières Nations. Today is a historic day for First Nations in Canada because it is one that opens the door to ensuring that this vision becomes a reality. As the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, it is an honor to present, and with a deep sense of responsibility, a proposed path forward for long-term reform for First Nations children and family services programs. Je le fais avec un respect et une responsabilité. Je crois que c'est important de déterminer un processus pour avancer ce dossier. I believe a path to move forward respects First Nations' rights to self-determine and ensure the best possible outcomes for First Nations children, and one that demonstrates the seriousness of our government's commitment to lasting systemic change. This is the message that I have heard from First Nations leaders across the country. Before I tell you what it is we intend to do, it's important to provide a bit of context to situate us today. In 2016, the Human Rights Tribunal found that Canada discriminated against First Nations children on reserve and in Yukon. This included underfunding child and family services compared to those available to other children in Canada. Depuis 2016, le Canada a fait beaucoup de progrès dans ce dossier. Since 2016, Canada has increased contributions for actual costs of these services from $600 million annually to nearly $4 billion a year. The reality is that while this progress has been made, First Nations children continue to be disproportionately represented in care. Il existe des preuves claires que la réforme à la long terme est une solution que nous avons besoin de déterminer. Quand les Premières Nations prennent contrôle de la gouvernance et de la reddition des comptes, les services donnent des meilleurs résultats pour les enfants parce qu'ils sont conçus, ouverts et supervisés par les Premières Nations. In 2002, Canada did the work with leadership of First Nations to put in place measures of reform that also included prevention and services of representation. In July of 2024, Canada and the Assembly of First Nations announced a proposed national final agreement on long-term reform. This was put to a vote at the AFN Special Assembly in Calgary on October 17 in 2024, where 267 chiefs and proxies out of 414 voted against the resolution that would have ratified a final agreement. Les chefs ont demandé à l'Assemblée de trouver une nouvelle voie. I've heard consistently from First Nations across the country throughout my time as minister that while some elements of the 2024 final agreement united First Nations together, it also lacked the flexibility needed to reflect regional realities. This is a critical shift that we have incorporated into our approach. For example, leadership from the Chiefs of Ontario and the Anishinaabe Nation wanted to move ahead with reforms by negotiating directly with Canada. We have undertaken that process with much success. In early 2025, the Government of Canada signed an $8.5 billion final agreement with the Chiefs of Ontario and Anishinaabe Nation to implement long-term reforms to the First Nations Child and Family Services Program in Ontario. So far, we have heard that this has been a successful approach. Ontario Chiefs are united in stating that this is the best path forward for them. We also believe that it is one that ensures First Nations access to resources that they need to implement meaningful, community-driven, and defined change for their children. On a écouté, on a appris, et aujourd'hui, on agit. For today's announcement, I'm proud to present a new path forward for First Nations and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal that reflects the regional realities and puts First Nations children and families at the core of decision-making. Moving forward, Canada's plan includes to advance long-term reform of the First Nations Child and Family Services Program that will be held alongside and with First Nations across this country. Canada's new regional approach will be supported by the continued commitment of funding dollars within the 10-year window that we have previously seen. We are looking to move forward with $35.5 billion until 2033-34 and a new commitment of $4.4 billion annually after that 10-year period to make sure that First Nations children and families now and in the future have consistent, sustainable resources of funding. Cette nouvelle approche est basée pour établir une ressource régionale et de soutenir par un niveau de 3,5 milliards de dollars sur 7 ans et de 4,4 milliards de dollars annuellement par la suite. C'est un engagement durable pour aujourd'hui et pour l'avenir. This commitment is equal to what has been proposed under the 2024 final agreement. This funding also includes additional supports for First Nations representatives who will act as cultural and legal advocates for the First Nations members when children and families are involved in child welfare system. Cet processus assure que les droits des enfants sont respectés et que les enfants restent proches de leur culture et leur communauté et leurs racines. Quelque chose d'important durant une période de temps où les enfants sont les plus vulnérables dans leur vie. This funding represents long-term investments to support sustainable First Nations-led change for now and future generations. Most importantly, this approach would enable First Nations-led regional agreements across the country within a national strategy to support solutions designed by and for First Nations to keep children safe and connected to their families, cultures, and communities. The additional work that we have to do when children find themselves in care, one of the most vulnerable periods of their lives. Avec ces négociations régionales et en travaillant ensemble, on va pouvoir adapter le cadre national aux réalités régionaux. This means making changes to reporting, planning, and governance so that First Nations Child and Family Services agencies are accountable not only to the communities that they serve, but also to the children and family that they are working with. In the early part of 2026, we will engage with First Nations communities in all regions across the country to articulate the nature of these proposed negotiations and to jointly determine appropriate space, pace, and format for these discussions. Beaucoup de nations et d'organisations régionales des Premières Nations ont demandé à mon ministre d'aller dans cette direction. Indeed, we have heard this message from across the country. I've received a number of Band Council resolutions to advance regional agreements, letters of interest to start exploratory discussions, and also letters of intent to pursue this dialogue. We want to prioritize progress made with partners that have expressed an interest in moving towards regional agreements. We will keep the door open to any nation that chooses to engage in this process. Our goal is to implement successfully concluded regional agreements by April 1st, 2027, including time for First Nations to transition. We know that the capacity and reality of First Nations across the country differs. We want to meet communities in the spaces that they're in and provide them the supports that they need to move forward and come online in the space that they need to be with. C'est un objectif ambitieux et on va avancer avec d'urgence, discipline et respect pour les Premières Nations. This approach will also help to create First Nations-led governance models that give First Nations the power to deliver better results for their children. This is of critical importance. This is what we have heard from First Nations communities. Regional models will seek to deliver tangible, material results, fewer children in care, ideally none, fewer children entering into care for the first time, ideally none, shorter stays because services are culturally grounded and better connected, and more children reunited with their families quicker. This is what solutions look like. This is what success looks like. Je veux être clair qu'on ne sera pas ici sans le leadership des Premières Nations. First Nations have set the direction that we are moving forward in. We are responding to it. This is a path forward that envisions First Nations-led, evidence-informed, and culturally appropriate direction. First Nations from across the country have been loud and clear. We support the long-term reform of child and family services, but agreements must and have to reflect regional realities, and participation has to be determined by the mandate of First Nations that they give to their regional organizations. I want to repeat, this is the most important part of moving forward today, that we have heard from First Nations, that they wish to determine the steps for them, and should they wish to seek and engage in providing a mandate to organizations to work with them, we will respect that and support the capacity that they need. As a former First Nations leader myself, I know that this type of change needs to be driven by decision-making at all levels within the community. It's also important that we reflect the diversity of First Nations across the country. We know that they each have their own unique language, culture, and relationship to their territory and structure as a community. During these negotiations, there will be no interruptions to services. We will continue in our commitment to deliver and fund child and family services within the national scale. On va continuer ce travail avec humilité, mais aussi avec d'urgence, au service des enfants, des familles et des communautés. En conclusion, j'aimerais dire que nous savons qu'il y a encore trop d'enfants qui ont été retirés de leur maison. Trop d'enfants grandissent dans une prise en charge. Ça cause des douleurs profondes et un traumatisme à long terme. We know that there are many children that are still entering into care. Far many that are being taken into custody for extended period of time that creates a lot of pain and hurt, but also long-term trauma. On ne sait que c'est pas juste une statistique, mais c'est une réalité vécue par les familles. This is not just a statistic. This is the reality that Indigenous families, First Nations families are facing today. We need to work together, government, communities, organizations, and families to change this reality by putting children and families at the center of every decision, every policy, and every funding choice. We are committed to doing that work. We want to ensure that in moving forward, that we have the future of those children at the very center of our decision-making. On fait en sorte que chaque enfant grandisse entouré par sa famille, sa culture et sa communauté. One of my commitments is to ensure that children are growing up within the context of their community and their family, understanding and knowing what their culture and identity is and their connection to their community. It's important that that identity is protected and that their language and connection is nurtured in this difficult time. Parents and caretakers feel secure in their ability to ask for help as part of this approach. We want to ensure that there are reliable services in the community, no matter what and where. En donnant plus de pouvoir aux Premières Nations avec les accords régionaux, on améliore l'accès des familles aux services et les résultats pour les enfants. This is how we will reduce the number of children in care and move to keep families together. I look forward to continuing this urgent and important work with all of you. Ensemble, on va faire des services forts et durables pour nos enfants. I want to also, in closing, express my thanks to everybody who has worked in this process. First, National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepignac, who has been working for and looking for direction from First Nations across the country and responding to what they have expressed in the last session and looking at a final agreement on long-term reform. I'd like to also thank former portfolio holder, Regional Chief Joanna Bernard, for everything that she's done in this space, as well as the new portfolio holder, Francis Véro-Paul, who I've had the opportunity to work with previously. In addition, the commitment and participation of the members of the National Children's Chief Commission and the Caring Society itself. We all have a mandate to serve First Nations children and their families. Now is the time that we have to move together forward in a good way and meet that responsibility with urgency, with trust, and meeting children's needs in the very space that they are in today. Agada, miigwech.
All right, thank you. We'll move to the Q&A portion. We'll start in the room. If you are on Zoom, please raise your hand now.
Sorry, we just have one more
Oh,
speaker.
more speakers. Okay, sorry. Never mind. We'll go to the parliamentary secretary.
Bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom est Ginette Lavac. Je suis la secrétaire parlementaire pour les services aux Autochtones Canada. C'est réellement un plaisir pour moi d'être ici aujourd'hui, de participer dans cette importante conférence de presse ensemble avec la ministre et un privilège, un énorme privilège pour moi de travailler sur ces dossiers importants. Alors, pour moi, ce jour, aujourd'hui, le dépôt de ce plan démontre réellement l'évolution de l'amélioration du programme pour répondre justement au fait que la discrimination a été notée par le tribunal. Mais disons-le, la ministre le dit souvent aujourd'hui, je le répète, c'est une nouvelle approche qu'on prend. Ce plan est réfléchi et il répond à ce que nous avons entendu sur le terrain avec les Premières Nations. Puis on le voit, les meilleurs plans qui sont jamais développés sont souvent ceux qui sont très souples, ceux qui sont évolutifs et continuent à changer et à bouger en fonction de ce que les participants vivent sur le terrain. Donc, le fait qu'on prenne une approche qui est régionale, que cette approche soit par, pour et avec les Premières Nations est au cœur de ce travail-ci. Puis pour moi, démontre, je pense, l'engagement, puis réaffirme réellement l'engagement qu'a notre gouvernement de faire avancer des solutions qui sont durables, mais qui sont aussi centrées sur les droits des enfants, le droit des familles, des Premières Nations. Donc, je crois que c'est vraiment un pas dans la bonne direction, puis je suis fière de pouvoir participer dans ce travail important, puis faire la suite ensemble avec l'équipe de la ministre. Bonne journée.
Okay, now we'll move to the period of questions. We'll start in the room with Alexandra Anger from Radio-Canada.
Bonjour et puis merci pour la présentation. J'aimerais qu'on nous explique un petit peu le processus qui a été demandé par le tribunal des
questions and answers period, and hope that you'll leave your discussion in our chat. We thank you for joining us. We'll be back. Have a good afternoon.